I'm curious for anybody out there who's currently raising young children, what do you think would be the best course of action they should take when raising their children? What should they keep in mind when trying to raise children in a more libertarian friendly, environment?
Yeah, for me, I speak specifically to what the ultimate ethical parenting modes are, and of course, I can't speak with as much authority as people who have had their own kids and have applied this. So often, I have to point to other people who are doing this and say, hey, well, don't just believe me. Look at this person or personally known contact person. But I do have some experience with young people directly because I have worked as a juvenile defense attorney. I've been a public school teacher or state school teacher, substitute teacher, full-time high school and K-8 school and tutoring company owner. So I have worked quite a bit with young people in unique ways that does at least give me an insight into a lot of what's going on in terms of the toxic tropes that happen with kids and the problems that can happen. So peaceful parenting and the unschooling ethos or mindset are kind of key here. And what I mean with peaceful parenting is that a parent looks to educate their children and give discipline within the realm of talking, reason, and restraint, or removing good things, as opposed to using threats, force, ultimatums, and hitting to achieve those aims. And so there's often this conflation that if you don't hit your kid, they'll just not be disciplined. This kind of thing with spanking. So it's a common misconception. Murray Strauss is a PhD researcher in this realm who studied the nature of spanking, corporal versus non-corporal punishment. And it's pretty abundantly clear at this point, no matter what way you cut it, whatever rationalization you want to use, that spanking does not produce the outcomes that people really claim it does. It just creates more trauma and more, negative outcomes, mentally in terms of brain development and socially. And rather that if you just use repeated non-corporal punishment, you basically have the same discipline outcomes generally, in the end, if not better. That is that if you don't use means to hit kids, but you repeatedly use those methods in terms of nonviolent methods, you still get kids eventually to get it, basically. And parents will hit their kids and the kids will still act in a way that they didn't like and then be like, well, I'll hit them again, right? They don't look at the spanking and say, oh, well, I guess spanking failed. They will keep repeating those violent things and ignore the fact that it didn't work the first time. So it's just it's a mentality change, and it's not something that is too bizarre to look at these days. Not that I, like state intervention or anything like that, but again, I'm just trying to point to what is in reality. And Sweden, banned spanking in 1979. So, did Sweden then turn into, this Mad Max landscape and kids are all in, roving street gangs because none of them were spanked? Like we expect, oh my gosh, they must all be violent and at each other's throats. It's like, no, parents just used other non-corporal punishment means to raise their kids. And that was that. That's basically what it boiled down to, right? So there are ways to have parenting be effective and disciplined without resorting to hitting. And one of the guides I recommend, who's again peaceful parent and has kids, so don't just believe me. I try to point to people who are experts in this area and apply it. Dr. Laura Markham, she has kids. She's has a doctorate as well, and she applied her psychological expertise in studying peaceful parenting techniques and applying that. And then she wrote a great book on that to help parents know how to effectively use non-corporal punishment means to help get their kids to be more self-reflective and self-regulating. And then the unschooling aspect of things is this idea that you don't have kids forced into a one-size-fits-all compulsory curriculum. It's that kids should be free to learn with adults acting as facilitators instead of judges. In other words, adults are there to help kids with their interests, not to tell them, hey, you need to learn this, today, and it must be done by 4:00. And if you don't, have these reading skills by this age, and you're a failure, you're going to work at McDonald's, right? That whole trope. So the unschooled mindset is just a paradigm shift in that realm, and kids who are treated well in this way don't become stupid. They don't not learn how to read. They just do it at their own pace in their own context and do so naturally because they want to engage in the world around them. And adults just act as facilitators of this. They just help them when they have questions or point them in a direction or give them resources. And so in this realm, kids can still read a textbook or take a class. It's just they elect to, they choose to. If a kid's like, I want to take a baking class, they can. If they want to take a programming class, they can. If they want to take a math class, they can. If they want to go to college, they can. They can study for the SAT and ACT. They can do all those things. It's just that it's not being forced on them, and they're not being told, hour by hour, you have to be studying this topic, then this topic. And if you don't turn your work by this time, you're a failure and you're just behind everybody. And it's, this whole shaming nonsense complex, goes away. And I think is something that's good, not just for those who are not great at academics and maybe they're more hands-on. It's great for academics too. If you're actually an academic, now you actually have the freedom to dive in deeper when you're actually more curious about things. You have the freedom to take classes that really mean something to you and to focus your studies. So it's a wonderful thing. And I think, again, pointing to other people who are well-credentialed in this area and who have applied this. I think Carrie McDonald, she has a master's degree from Harvard in educational policy. She's a Foundation for Economic Education fellow and scholar. She has her own 4 kids, so she's unschooled, and she actually spends her days studying alternative education and going and around the country and showcasing these things. So I recommend her book, Unschooled, Raising Curious, Well-Educated Children Outside the Conventional Classroom. That is a great starting guide to understanding unschooling, seeing how it's applied in a bunch of different ways and means and manners, and giving yourself some tools to think about how you would do it for your own kids. So again, don't just believe me. I'm sorry I don't have kids. I have a lot of experience with kids, but again, I don't have kids. But look at these other scholars to start, and they will also lead you to other scholars and people who have applied these practices with their own kids. It's not a small thing. Peaceful parenting is certainly very widespread, and unschooling now didn't used to be as widespread, but it's definitely grown like a wildfire since the lockdown shutdowns, because suddenly a bunch of parents realized how bad the schooling system was. They got to see their kids and what they were bringing home and what their teachers were doing. They're suddenly like, oh, okay, I'm going to be taking it out of the school, right? So homeschooling, unschooling shot through the roof and has continued to maintain pretty steady hold with a lot of parents suddenly becoming privy to just how bad things were. So those are really, to me, the ultimate libertarian voluntarist manners for helping children become flourishing adults is unschooling, peaceful parenting.
A lot of these government public schools, are just complete disasters in some cases. Basically, what I find interesting, though, is if we're talking about schooling in a completely voluntary sense, though, as we know, young children, they tend to have very high time preferences. What kind of interests me is, if a young child would just prefer to take the easier way out, to essentially neglect their studies, what kind of incentive would we be able to provide for somebody with such high time preferences to get them to actually, pursue what's best for them in more of an educational and informative sense?
Well, what's best is subjective. Each person has their own individual path, interests, and journey. So the better question is which bureaucrat gets to decide what's best for this child and their personal journey of what they want to do with their lives? Because that's the mentality that is of the schooled mindset, right? We have the greatest socialist central plan you can imagine with public schools, which is also one of the 10 planks of communism. So I think that the mentality has to be divorced from that, where you're not thinking, oh, this kid has to be this certain thing or this certain thing in this time. Children who are treated with this type of respect and autonomy find their interests through exploration and through play and become attuned to what it is that they are most interested in that process. And it could take different routes and different times for different people, because everyone is biologically different. Unlike what they show in schools, where like, oh yeah, everyone's must be the same thing in a year from each other. It's like, no, their brain development, physical development varies wildly across children. And I've certainly seen that myself working with, the K to 12 paradigm. So it's just important to recognize that if there is something genuinely wrong with a young person where they seem shamed or they seem unmotivated about anything, then there might be something else to look at and what's underpinning that. Is there some type of dysfunction going on at home in communication? Is there some type of thing taking place for them where they feel ashamed? Is there something that is a genuine health or mental health problem? Because there's always going to be people in the world who might have an actual disorder of sorts, right? There's definitely people with autism spectrum disorder. There's definitely people with, different types of depression issues that are genuinely chemical, due to a disorder. So, there's always going to be some type of outliers of people. You never know where there's something to investigate. But when we're talking about, by and large, most every child, you're not going to have a problem with them, with being free to learn, picking up the tools of the culture and growing and learning how to read and their numeracy just by being free to engage in the world around them. Just learning how to play games and learning how to count for, deck building card games and all this other stuff. It's truly incredible what young people will do when given the chance. And there's a great, I'd say, a TEDx talk about that by Sugatra Mitra, where he set up computers in a very poor Indian community, and the kids were just teaching themselves all kinds of stuff using the computers, and then the older ones are teaching the younger ones. I mean, it's just incredible to show that when you just give kids the freedom to play and tinker, they start to pick up stuff. I mean, it really is not very difficult to do. The kids are just a big sponge. Their brain is growing so fast and they're trying to take everything in. And if you just give them the freedom to explore and really dive deep, everything else falls into place.